Welcome back, everyone. This is Dave from Corman Productions, here to talk about the latest episode of This Is Us, Season 4, Episode 10, titled Light and Shadows. I'm going to do this video a little bit differently than I've been doing videos on this series up to this point. I'm not going to do a blow-by-blow description like I did basically for the first two episodes of the series, nor am I going to discuss just a single plot line. I'm basically going to take the threads of this episode and briefly discuss my feelings on each of them. I didn't really love this episode. I didn't hate it, but at the same time I felt it was kind of rushed and too crammed with the story elements that I think would have been better if they'd spread it out a little bit more and maybe saved some of this story for a later episode. But I think they were just moving the pieces to get where they wanted to get. I'll start off with Kevin's thread, which kind of feels like it belongs in a different show. Something more like a sitcom than the drama series that we watch week in and week out. As we learned at the end of the fall finale, Kevin's goal is to now be married and have a kid within the 9 months that he has before he turns 40. And then we see in the flashback that he somehow succeeds in this very rushed goal. So now a big part of the back half of the season is going to be Kevin finding love and someone he's going to be engaged to and have a kid with. That's pretty much all Kevin's thread is about in this episode, and it plays out in a very silly fashion. We start off finding out that Kevin has signed up for a matchmaking service, and that particular thread doesn't even make it through the opening credits before it's finished. You know, it seems like there was some comic potential there, but they barely bother to try exploring that before they move on to the next thing. He meets a girl played by Sophia Bush, who the creators had made it seem like she was going to become a series regular, or at least be on the show a little bit more. That doesn't turn out to be the case. Her thread begins and ends here. Essentially, Kevin tries too hard to make her into the one for him. You know, he pulls out all the stops, he pulls out some romantic moves that he probably learned from his dad. You know, go big or go home. And she turns out to be married, and Kevin is basically her hall pass. Basically, if you meet a certain celebrity, you can go ahead and sleep with them. I actually kind of had something like that when about 2 relationships ago, and in my case it was Kristen Dunst who was my hall pass. That never happened for me, sadly enough. The last we see of Kevin in this episode is him missing a call from Sophie, his longtime love, who he's had a not exactly great history with. And I guess she's the next suspect up in who's Kevin's baby mama. Okay, I see how this is gonna play out. Next episode we're gonna see Sophie, and she's gonna be back for 1 episode before going away, and then we're gonna bring back Zoe. She's gonna be a suspect for an episode, and then she's gonna go away, and then maybe every girlfriend that Kevin has ever had is going to re-enter the picture somehow. And then Cassidy, played by Jennifer Morrison, who we spent quite a bit of time at the beginning of the season, is going to come back, and she's pregnant with Kevin's child, but she decides to have an abortion, and the season will end with meeting a completely different girl that we've never seen before. Okay guys, this show is not titled How I Met Your Mother. I'm not really pleased with how they're treating Kevin's character here, and I am hoping that his thread for the rest of the episodes of the season is not going to play out like I've just described. I'm hoping there's going to be more depth to his storylines than that. In an overstuffed episode, I kind of feel like this particular thread could have been minimized or cut completely. The next thread up is Toby and Cate. Now, in the prior episode, I said that I didn't want to really deal with them, that they looked doomed, and I just didn't want to talk about them. And it kind of feels like the writers didn't even feel like dealing with them and their thread. because they really blew through their story in this episode. It kind of seems like they felt obligated to deal with the situation, given the fact that they brought it up in the fall finale, but they really didn't want to. It's curiously muted, but also refreshingly direct. When we last saw Cate and Toby, Cate was seeing a message on Toby's phone that seemed incriminating and led to the idea that perhaps Toby was cheating on her. That's dispensed with almost immediately. Cate and Toby walked through the door. Toby asks her what's wrong, and Cate just tells him. A stark contrast to how they dealt with the whole avocado gate thing, which I did not talk about in the last episode, and kind of honestly I'm not going to now because it's just freaking silly. Cate asks him if he's cheating with her, and Toby denies it, and then Cate ends up leaving him. And that's the end of that for the time being. Cate then decides to be more accepting of Toby's new lifestyle, his CrossFit lifestyle that he took on at the beginning of the season, as a way to be healthier and stick around for his blind son Jack. She throws him a birthday party and invites all his gym friends, which is where she finds out that he actually quit the gym 2 weeks ago and has been going to another one. Oh, well, what's up with this? Toby comes to the door, sees all his former gym mates, and then realized he's in trouble. That party ends, and then Toby's basically like, okay, let's get this over with. Let's get to it. And he reveals that the friend that he thought was just a friend tried to kiss him, so she had to switch gyms. But we don't see any of that. They don't bother to show us that. They could have taken their time with the story and developed that relationship, and then oops, they kissed, and now Toby has to leave the gym. But they just blow right through it. They decide not to do the whole maxim of don't tell but show, and they just tell. Toby reveals the reason why he's been distant with both his wife and his son, and it's because of Jack's blindness. He can't help but look at his son and see all the things that he's not going to be able to see. He's not going to know their faces. He's not going to be able to see the beach or plenty of other beautiful sights. And that fills him with sadness, and so he's been distancing himself. While I feel for him, I also kind of feel like this is out of character for Toby, who's been portrayed throughout the series as kind of Cate's rock. Their thread ends with Jack being able to see light, and Cate and Toby reacting to it joyfully. This thread could have benefited from more time, and definitely suffers from the rushed nature of the episode. But then again, I wasn't really thrilled with this whole thing in the first place, so I guess I'm glad to just be done with it. Next up is Jack and Rebecca's thread, which this season has featured a lot of Jack scenes and storylines that I haven't been thrilled with. I've considered them to be pretty pointless. Anytime we get a storyline nowadays about Jack and Rebecca and their early romance and trying to throw things in their way, it just seems pointless. We already know how this story ends, so there's no suspense here. This episode presents the continuation of Jack's conflict with Rebecca's father, played by Tim Matheson, who I knew from The West Wing, but he's been in a ton of things. And while I enjoy seeing him, I don't enjoy this particular story. I just don't think there's a point to it. I love Milo Ventimiglia as much as the next guy. He does great work on this series, but he doesn't need to be in every single episode. They could have cut his storyline completely out of this episode and made time for something more. Or minimize his scenes and tie him more into Rebecca's illness storyline in the future, which is what I think they were going for, but it didn't quite click. And finally, we get the meat and potatoes of this episode with Rebecca's illness storyline, featuring a lot more of Miguel and Randall. At the beginning of it, we see Miguel and Randall talking about Rebecca's upcoming appointment. Randall says that he's going to be there, and Miguel seems annoyed by this. But Randall thinks it's important for him to be there, and he's flown across the country for much less than this. Miguel's annoyance is twofold. One, he feels Randall is kind of blowing things out of proportion and making much too big a deal of Rebecca's issues, simply saying that they're getting older, and a memory problem is not that uncommon when you start to get older. The second part of it is, I think he resents the implication that he can't take care of his wife. He doesn't think Randall needs to come down here for a simple doctor's appointment because Miguel can handle it. The conflict between the two of them makes complete sense, and I think could have benefited from further fleshing out. In other words, maybe cutting some of the fat elsewhere and giving it more to this storyline, because this, as I said, is where the main drama is, and where the meat and potatoes is. Randall makes the comment that he noticed something wrong with Rebecca after spending just a little bit of time with her. How did Miguel, who spends a lot more time with her, not notice these issues? And before we actually got an answer to that question, I had a theory. And it's basically that Miguel didn't want to see it. But also there's such a thing as being too close to the situation. When you are with somebody every day, subtle changes are hard to notice sometimes. And I think the fact that Randall wasn't with her every day is why he was able to notice more of these changes than Miguel was. On top of not being in denial, like Miguel also is. This thread ends with Rebecca getting the news that she has mild cognitive impairment, which isn't so much a diagnosis as basically a confirmation of a symptom of a much larger problem. Miguel at that point mentions to Randall that he did indeed notice some things that were wrong, but he assumed it was more about them getting older than anything else. Miguel at the end almost desperately seems to try to be convincing Randall that he will indeed take care of his wife and that he will get her to all her appointments and so on and so forth, and Randall simply tells him that he knows. Randall returns home, kisses his wife, goes down to get a drink, and then notices an intruder in his home. They stare at each other, and Randall seems terrified. I had to rewind this like 3 different times to see who this guy was. I was trying to see if we knew him, and we don't. It's just a random guy with a knife. I'm going to conclude this video talking about the promo for next week's episode, which kind of makes me a little bit nervous. We seem to be getting that Randall breakdown story that was hinted at in the 5th episode of the season, Storybook Love, which I discussed. But we really haven't seen any evidence of that since then. It's not only implied that the guy with the knife is a hallucination, which by the way goes beyond simple anxiety, but it's also implied that maybe he's had similar issues exactly like that in the past. I'm not sure if that's exactly where they're going, but again, that's not just anxiety, that's a whole other ball of wax. And I take issue with the idea that he's had hallucinations in his past that we've never heard of up until this point. If this is a new problem, okay, I can deal with that. But if we're saying that he's had this problem before, not so much. So I'm a little bit nervous going into next episode to see what they're going to do here. Anyway, that's all I got for you today, guys. So, if you like this video, please like, subscribe to my channel, share the video, comment, all that jazz. This is Dave from Corman Productions, signing off.